This is how Robert Kiyosaki would begin the information that he is about to disclose. The first 10 years of this century, we have had three significant crashes. The first financial crisis was the dot-com disaster in the year 2000, then the real estate subprime crash in 2006, and finally, the banking crisis in 2008. The question that needs answering is this the next one? This is the massive crash that occurred in 1929. And no matter how many times you listen to those guys on CNBC, they never stop talking about the catastrophic stock market crash that occurred in 1929. It can't possibly be compared to what's going to happen next. Therefore, this is the reason why he writes and speaks, and he is really concerned about our futures, our well-being, and the position the economy is in. Not so long ago, he noted that the moment to prepare for a crash that is most effective is right before the crash itself. The biggest crash in the history of the world is about to occur, and there has been a lot of news about it. The bad news is that the best time to get rich is when the market is falling, but the good news is that you can. The bad news is that the crash will last for a lengthy period of time, which actually is wonderful news for him. There is a certain amount of wisdom that comes with advancing years. What he has is the result of the fact that he truly lived through historical events. The S&P 500 is actually the S&P 7, and Treasury Secretary Yellen and Treasury Secretary Powell are keeping it from falling. Therefore, there is no connection between the state of the economy and the actions taken by Yellen and Powell. The next market crisis is going to be amazing, but unfortunately, it will have a negative impact on precious metals, cryptocurrencies, and stock prices. The optimistic outlook is that now is an excellent moment to make money and become wealthy. The most important question is whether or not there is inflation or deflation. And if you go back in history, you'll see that what's happening today with nominal debt in proportion to GDP is correlated with M2, which is the amount of money multiplied by how fast it circulates. And the reason that Yellen and Powell are in such a panic is that they increased M2, which has led everyone to believe that it will lead to inflation. But the velocity of money is decreasing, which is something that Jim Rickards and Robert Kiyosaki frequently talk about. Both of these authors predict that this trend will continue. People are not making purchases. Because of this passive injection of capital, prices will inevitably rise. In the meantime, Asians are closing the gap now that the ports are finally open, indicating that inflation is a trend rather than a permanent one. The problem, however, is that we are buried under a mountain of debt, and all that this debt has accomplished is to drive up the value of the stock market and the real estate market. The money has not been put into circulation within the economy. That's the miserable thing. Therefore, those who are already wealthy continue to acquire more wealth, while those in the middle class and lower income brackets experience a decline in their standard of living. What is taking place today is extremely unfortunate. Although he is unsure of the specifics, it is impossible to maintain producing counterfeit currency. That would be M2. And the philosophy portion of it continues becoming lower, despite the fact that the debt keeps getting more, which means that we don't need to go to Harvard to understand it. This is going to be the most catastrophic crash in the history of the globe. Never before have we racked up this much debt. Despite the fact that debt is the most significant issue, the money supply is referred to as M2. And there is no way to calculate the debt to GDP ratio. Therefore, when it collapses, it will bring everything else along with it. And he wants to explain the bigger picture to people. When he claims that Yellen and Powell are both narcissists, as Robert Kiyosaki has done, he gets called a liar. A line from Lenin was recited by Robert Kiyosaki. When a nation is communized, Vladimir adds, the construction of a central bank is 90% of it. The names Yellen and Powell come to mind. Another quote attributed to Lenin can be found in his book, The Communist Manifesto. It states that the easiest approach to smash the capitalist system is to degrade the currency. That indicates desperate people doing desperate actions. This is the stock market. As both of you and he are aware, and contrary to what I indicated earlier, it is not the S&P 500, but the S&P 7. Additionally, the gap between the economy and the stock market has never been wider than it is today. He is currently unsettled due to the fact that the money is just remaining in the investor market. Only people like him stand to benefit financially whenever the Federal Open Market Committee, or the Fed, or the Treasury Department takes action. But the money is not going into the real economy. They're not investing, and they haven't invested for years in plant and equipment. So that's why we have tremendous massive unemployment and underemployment, and that's why Lenin has said that the greatest approach to destroy capitalism is to debauch currency. It wasn't until 1971 that the dollar was officially removed from its connection to the gold standard. In Vietnam, he went behind the backs of the enemy alliance in search of gold. The reason for this is because in 1972, it was against the law for Americans to hold gold. The worst possible times for the markets are the finest times for making money. So it seems like Robert Kiyosaki is getting extremely excited about the possibility of a market crash occurring, since it will make better equities available. Regrettably, there would be significant levels of social instability. When this happens, Robert Kiyosaki becomes increasingly anxious because we have not made any investments recently. When the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department have just invested in the investor class, they haven't put any money toward the middle class or the working class. And despite being members of the working classes, they do not have employment or get compensated for their labor. Because of the impending destruction of 401k accounts, he is primarily expressing his disapproval of the current state of affairs. He was constantly monitoring YouTube as well as the other financial markets. And all of that is undoubtedly one of the many wonderful aspects of modern technology. Technology was significantly advanced thanks to COVID's efforts. Robert Kiyosaki has the opportunity to hear from some of the most knowledgeable individuals on the planet. He mentioned that he is currently listening to Lacey Hunt, who is discussing deflation in the program. Additionally, he listens to Rickards, who also discusses deflation in his stocks. Robert Kiyosaki is also naming Yellen and Powell, who worked for the Fed and for the Treasury, which is once again a communist institution. And what Robert Kiyosaki is trying to get across is that it is now time for people to wake up to the reality of the situation. What Robert Kiyosaki is implying is that you are aware that the majority of parents recommend that their children continue their education, save money, and work hard. However, in 1970, when he finished from school, $1 million earning 15% interest earned me $150,000 each year. A year's salary of $150,000 was sufficient for living expenses in those days. One further thing that happens when people's salaries fall down is that they become dependent on other people. At the same time, the government of the United States informs us that poverty has been defeated in the United States. Maybe poverty has been eliminated, but what has grown is a sense that people are entitled to certain benefits. The mentality that one ought to rely on other people and government to look after their needs. The fact that the ordinary individual is a consumer is the primary reason why inflation will eventually lead to the extinction of humanity. That's because the bankers are being shielded by Biden and co. And the Federal Reserve. For this reason, he has compassion for those in the working class. Robert Kiyosaki considers it a crime that Marxism may be found in American classrooms. It is not a bad thing that schools don't teach students about money management. Since the publication of his first book, he has been making this claim. But now that we have a clearer picture of events, we hear claims like, it's because the container ships aren't being emptied at Long Beach Harbor, and similar nonsense. Everything Robert Kiyosaki says is utter nonsense. But he did get an education and a third Maze license, so he can legally pilot ships and airplanes. Consequently, people who are complaining about the rising cost of living should. This is due to the fact that the Federal Reserve Bank and the United States Treasury, both of which are headed by Janet Yellen, a former chairwoman of the Federal Reserve Bank, are as corrupt as it is possible to get. The Federal Reserve Board ought to have let those individuals fail, but instead, they chose to keep them afloat despite the fact that they ought to have allowed them to fail. In spite of their steady financial success, they continued to rack up more debt. Simply put, it resulted in the production of additional counterfeit money, which in turn caused the economy of the United States to suffer. The disadvantage kept growing as a result of the fact that they had to keep traveling back and forth on Triffin's conundrum. Schumpeter, who maintained that capitalism is a destructive system, is another important figure in this debate. The entire system is predicated on the fact that if a dollar comes in, they will have the London out, and the collateral will begin to deteriorate immediately. Therefore, this is the reason why he predicts that there would be deflation rather than inflation. However, the Federal Reserve has to maintain the appearance that there is inflation. Do you have anything to add to what Robert Kiyosaki said in this video? We are interested in hearing your take on this. Please share your opinions with us by filling out the comment box down below.